Hello friends, my name is Bintou and welcome back to my channel. And today we're going to talk about all of my reading for the month of April. Now, April I feel like has been my lowest quality month of reading so far this year, both in terms of quantity and a little bit in terms of quality. So I read the least number of books that I read in a month this year. 6 books so far I have completed, and 1 book I'm at the 80% mark. So I think I'm going to complete that as well before the month is over. It's April 28th, so I have like 2 more days to finish it. And I wouldn't say that I was super blown away by any of the books that I read either. I think I had a good number of 4 stars in there, but I don't think I had any 5 stars this month. So in terms of quality, nothing totally blew me away. Now, part of that was simply because I was also in the middle of moving and switching back to in-person. So it's just been a crazy month, but I feel like I spent a lot of time this month on YouTube. And I mean as a watcher rather than not even like creating videos. I was mostly just watching videos. And so looking forward to May, I'm hoping that I can kind of find a better balance, because 10 books a month is right where I want to be. That means that I'm not spending far too much time on YouTube just mindlessly consuming content, which is its own kind of fun, but I do want to keep that in check just a little bit. So now let's talk about the books that I read this month. Of the 7 books that I'm gonna include in this list, 4 of them were like mystery, thriller, horror books. So I really leaned into the mystery thriller this month. I read 1 nonfiction, which is awesome because I was really low on the nonfictions. I was hoping to get to another one, but I didn't quite get to it yet. I think I'll read it in May. I read 1 romance and then 1 sort of historical fiction. Let's start with the mystery thrillers. And all of these I think were perfectly okay books. So the first book on this list was Too Good to Be True by Carola. And this was a very recent release. It was one of the book of the month picks. I didn't get it through them because I don't have a book of the month subscription, but I was able to get a hold of the audiobook and ebook from my public library. So Too Good to Be True, it was one of my more enjoyable books. It's got a 3-person point of view, Heather, Sky, and Burke. So it's 2 women and 1 man, and both of them were dating this man at different points in time. We're kind of learning the details of their relationship at those 2 different points in time. Each of the 3 characters is kind of telling their own version of the truth of what's happening in the various relationships in the book. And you kind of have to try to figure out who is right. And I think right around the 50% mark, I already knew what the big twist that was coming. The good news is by the end, you do eventually get everything wrapped up. So like there aren't any major cliffhangers, which I prefer in a book. But if you're not that person that likes to read through, if you kind of can already predict what's gonna happen, you may not like this, because if I was able to predict it at 50%, then most people are probably gonna get it at like 20%. I'm usually really late to finding these things out, which is why I love the genre. I thought overall it was a pretty thrilling ride, and I think that if you really enjoyed Verity, which is a book that I read last year by Colleen Hoover, if you like that book, you really want to pick this up because it reminded me so much of Verity. Next on my list is The Loss of Apothecary by Sarah Penner. And this is another pretty recent release, and this is another one that I think is also on Book of the Month. But again, I just got this in my library. And The Loss of Apothecary is one of those, it's a historical fiction, but it's also set in 2 different time periods, so both past and present. And it is told from the point of view of 3 different women, 2 of them in the past and 1 in present day London, England. So the setup for the story is this woman she's from Ohio, she's visiting London for her anniversary, and she picks up this vial in the Thames River. And she sets out on a mission to research kind of the apothecary behind this vial. And she wants to learn the story of the woman who ran the apothecary as well. And then simultaneously, we are reading the stories of those women in the past. The apothecary was basically providing poisons to various women during that time period. A lot of them were using it to basically kill their husbands for mostly infidelity. I thought this was a really enjoyable read. It is historical fiction, but there's also a mystery element to it because you're trying to unfold what happened to the woman over the course of the entire book. And I think the switch between the 2 time periods was also really well done. I listened to this on audiobook, pretty much most of it actually. And that was really awesome because when there are multiple points of views, it's really nice when they have multiple different narrators, and this audiobook does do that. This might be a really good book if you're getting into historical fiction because it still felt very contemporary. The writing felt very contemporary despite the elements of historical fiction that were sprinkled throughout this one. And this is probably high on the list of favorites that I read this month. I like this one a lot. Next on my list, this was the nonfiction that I read. This was called Rest. And this book is exactly what it sounds like. It is all about rest. And the idea that we live in a society, I think, where we emphasize working and overworking as being the end all be all. And it's kind of like bragging rights, like I work this many hours and I get this little sleep. And this is kind of the opposite of that, emphasizing the fact that active rest and making time for it is vital to leading a happier life. This book, I will say, and I didn't notice when I picked this up, it is more focused on creatives. So people like artists, musicians, there is scientists in here as well, since their work can technically be creative in a way. For me, I feel like that was more of a downfall. I wish it were more generalized to just people in general, because I think everyone could benefit from this, not just creatives and creative work. The other thing that I didn't like about this book is that despite all of the conversation that he gets into about rest, all the benefits of rest, the research and the anecdotes that he includes in there, I feel like this book didn't do a very good job of then showing you how to implement this stuff in your life. As opposed to a book like Breath, which is a book that I read last year that talked about, breathing and all the benefits of breathing, but then at the end also gives you actual steps. This book kind of lacked that. And to me, in a book like this, that's something that probably should have been included. Overall, it was still really fascinating and I'm glad that I read it, but I think that this book was missing things that could have really brought it up to the 5-star mark. Next, I read Real Men Knit by Quana Jackson, and this was the only romance that I read this month. And I would say that this was pretty good. So it's called Real Men Knit because it is set in this knitting shop in New York City, where the mother of these 4 adopted sons, she passed away, and they're left with her knitting shop and they have to decide what to do with it. And one of the girls that's currently working there, she kind of grew up with them and she's been running the shop. She really wants to keep the shop open, so she's working with one of the brothers to kind of get it solvent again because it was in a lot of debt. And the romance is developing between those 2 characters as they're trying to get more customers into the shop and find new ways to keep it alive. I did enjoy it as far as romance goes. Again, it was nothing like innovative in the romance genre, but it was still a fun read. Then I read I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and this was the horror-ish book that I read this month. I read this because I was watching this video on Jordan Reid's channel with all these horror booktubers that put together a bunch of recommendations, and this was on there and it was really short, so I thought, why not pick it up? And I was able to get the audiobook from my library too, pretty much right away. And it is really short, which is great. The story itself is interesting. So it's told from the perspective of this girl, and she's in a relationship and she's going to see her boyfriend's parents, but she is thinking of ending things, and that's why it's called I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Over the course of this short trip, she's trying to kind of solidify her decision to leave her boyfriend. That's kind of as much as I can give away without giving away the book. I will say that this, I would say, was a psychological horror / thriller read. I personally thought it was a little too dragged out, which is funny because it's a really short story, but she kept dragging out this conversation of thinking of ending things. It is creepy though, I will say. It is a little bit creepy as you're going through it, so I can see why this is a horror book. And overall, it is enjoyable, so if you're looking for a really short horror read, this is something that I would recommend. I think that I gave it more of a 3 stars. It didn't like knock my socks off, but I didn't hate it either. Next to last, I read The Plea by Cavanagh. And I read this book because I made a video on 5 recommendations in the legal crime thriller genre, and 2 separate people recommended this series. So I decided that I would pick this up. And this is very much on par with a lot of the books that I recommended in that video. And this book in particular followed a lawyer, and he's representing someone who the FBI is trying to get him to convince to put in a guilty plea. But he doesn't believe that his client is actually guilty. He thinks his client is innocent. And so he doesn't want to force his client to plead. Now, the problem is that they're holding something over him and they're pretty much blackmailing him in order to do this. And he has to decide between like his family's welfare and doing the right thing for the job. I did like the main lawyer character in this book. He's pretty funny, and I would say overall that this book does a really good job of adding comedy into the genre. The only thing that happened with me for this book is I mostly listened to it on audio because I was listening to this book as I was packing up. And so I think because of that, I may have missed a lot of things. And this is a genre in particular that I don't usually just listen to on audiobook. I usually follow along the book when I'm reading these mystery thrillers. And I learned that that's what I really need to do, because I think that this book fell flatter than it would have for me if I had took the time to actually read the ebook along with the audiobook. I'm definitely going to give another Steve Cavanagh book in this series a try because again, it is right up the alley of books that I really like to read in this genre. And speaking of that exact same kind of genre, that brings us to the last book that I am actually currently reading, and this is called The Jigsaw Man by Nadine Matheson. And I picked this up because of Nakia. I had mentioned in one of my videos I was looking for more mystery thrillers by authors of color, and so she recommended this and I picked this up. So this follows she is a detective inspector. So that's the other thing. This book is actually set in England and I had no idea. I don't know why. Well, actually, I know why. I never read blurbs of books. I kind of just pick them up and start reading. And I've never read a book in this genre that is set outside of the US is what I realized as I was reading this because I don't know a lot of these titles and how they kind of compare to what we have here. But anyway, that's beside the point. So this is called The Jigsaw Man because the detective, is following a serial killer who likes to cut up the bodies of his victims into many pieces, and that's why he's called the Jigsaw Man. Now, the actual serial killer is in prison, but it seems like a copycat is doing his work. And eventually the killer himself escapes from prison. You'd think that'd be a spoiler, but it's actually in the blurb as well for whatever reason. But it doesn't happen until about halfway through the book. I'm still not quite done with this, so I'm at the 80% mark right now, and I'm hoping to finish it in the next day or two. For me, I think this book felt very routine. So again, very much like all the other books in this genre. I do feel like it wasn't as suspenseful as I was hoping it would be. And that's why it's taking me a lot longer to get through this than it normally would to take me to get through one of these. It is on the longer side too, so there's that. I thought that the characters were okay. One thing this book does that I haven't read another book that does this quite as well is there are sort of two main characters. There's like one main character, but there is a secondary character who is like being mentored by the main detective, and it shows a lot of snippets inside both of their lives. Now, I haven't decided whether or not I liked that in this book. Overall, I feel like Jigsaw Man is gonna be about a 3-star read for me. I feel like maybe I would pick up another book in this series, but I'm not certain. And so for that reason, this wasn't like one of my favorite mystery thrillers. And that brings us to the end of the list of the books that I read so far this month. Next month, I'm hoping to get to a lot more non-fiction and maybe pause the brakes on the mystery thriller. So I've got a couple that I really still do want to read. So actually, this is the list of books that I was hoping to get through in April. You can see that I've gotten through, again, I've completed 6 of them, and I'm in the middle of The Jigsaw Man by Nadine Matheson. 2030 is a nonfiction book that I really want to get to. Stuff Matters, I had that borrowed. I think my loan ended though, so I might have to reborrow that and see if I can actually get to it in May. And Misery was one of the books that I wanted to read this month. It says it's currently in my Libby, but that also expired. So I probably will try to put it on hold. Actually, I did put it on hold, but the whole list is so long, I might have to actually buy that using one of my Audible credits. There are 2 Kindle Unlimited mystery thrillers that I wanted to read. The Robert Dugani book and then the Melinda Lay book. Both of those are part of a series that I have followed and enjoyed, so I really want to get to those books as well. So here is to hoping that my reading in May will be a lot stronger and I'll have more completed books than not. Let me know in the comment section below what some of your reading plans are for the next month. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.